I am 55 years old, and every weekday morning I unlock a narrow storefront clinic wedged between a dry cleaner and a payday loan office on a quiet street in our county. The first thing I do is switch on the coffee maker, because free coffee gets people in the door, and then I set out a dozen bright ceramic mugs on a small sideboard. Each mug is hand-thrown by a local potter I found at the farmer's market, and each one is glazed in cheerful blues and yellows with a line of text that reads, "My MBA was funded by my aunt's sacrifice." The man who begrudgingly volunteers there 4 times a year, his silk tie embroidered with the words, "Fiduciary Fraudster" in dark crimson thread, once looked me in the eye and called the $92,000 I gave him a simple gift. He was wrong about that, wrong about me, and wrong about everything else he thought he could steal. And the chain of events that led to that mug, that tie, and the garnishment order nailed to his paycheck started with a locked wooden box no bigger than a shoebox, hidden behind my late husband's flannel shirts, a box my nephew Jeremy tossed into a black contractor bag 3 hours after the funeral. My name is Ellen. For 33 years I was the head bookkeeper for a mid-sized regional construction company, the kind of woman who could spot a 10-cent discrepancy in a 40,000-line general ledger before lunch. I knew the cost of every galvanized nail, every cubic yard of concrete, every payroll check, every depreciation schedule, every fuel surcharge down to the fraction of a cent, and I had a reputation for being able to trace a single misplaced decimal through a web of intercompany accounts without ever raising my voice. My husband Michael was a master finish carpenter with forearms like corded rope and a workshop that smelled of sawdust and tung oil. He could build anything from a spice rack to a spiral staircase, and over our decades together he built us a life that was quiet, debt-free, comfortable, and so frictionless that we never argued about money because we had a shared, bone-deep respect for the value of a dollar and the danger of credit. We never had children of our own, but Michael had a soft spot for his late sister's only boy, Jeremy, and over the years he sent birthday checks, covered his community college tuition, and always said the kid just needed a little guidance. I kept my own counsel. There was something about the way Jeremy's eyes did a rapid inventory whenever he walked into a room, the way he always seemed to be calculating the resale value of our furniture behind his smile, that never sat right with me. I am not a suspicious person by nature, but I am an accountant, and I know when the numbers do not add up. Michael was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on a Tuesday in April and was gone before the leaves turned. The life insurance policy, a whole life plan he had purchased when we were newlyweds, paid out $95,000 into a trust he had established 15 years earlier and quietly updated the month before his diagnosis. Michael was a carpenter who measured twice and cut once, and he built his financial instruments with the same exacting precision. The day of the funeral, I came home to find Jeremy and his wife Tiffany already inside the house. They had used a spare key Michael had given them for emergencies and were moving through the rooms with a quiet, proprietary efficiency that made the hair on my arms stand up. Tiffany was in the master bedroom with the closet doors wide open, pulling out my jewelry box and photographing the contents with her phone, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. Jeremy was in Michael's closet, pushing aside shirts and jackets, checking pockets, pulling shoeboxes from the high shelf. I stood in the doorway and watched, unspeaking, as Tiffany's hand closed around a small, dusty wooden box that had been jammed into the back corner of the top shelf, behind a stack of folded flannel shirts Michael wore on cold mornings. The box was about 9 inches long, 6 wide, 4 deep, and its lid was carved with a faint, intricate image of 2 interlocking gears, the wood dark and smooth from years of handling. Tiffany shook it. It gave a soft rattle of something small and dense sliding inside. Jeremy glanced over and said, "Probably just old screws and washers. Dad's junk, toss it," and she dropped it into the black trash bag with the same casual disregard you would use to throw away a pizza box. I did not say a word. I catalogued the moment, filed it away in a locked drawer of my mind, and kept my face still. That evening, after they had left with a typed list of items they would be safeguarding for me because I was obviously too distraught to manage, I walked out to the garage, pulled the box from the bag, wiped it clean with a damp cloth, and carried it to the kitchen table. Around my neck, under the collar of my black funeral dress, I wore a small brass key on a fine gold chain. Michael had pressed it into my palm on our 20th anniversary with a wink and said, "For something only you should open." For 20 years I wore that key without ever discovering its lock. That night, alone in the house with the refrigerator hum and the silence of a half-empty bed, I slid the key into the tiny escutcheon on the front of the box and turned. The mechanism was a small deadbolt, beautifully machined, and it slid back with a deep, satisfying click that I felt in my fingertips. Inside, there was no jewelry, no cash, no antique watch. There was a single sheet of heavy cream stationery folded into crisp thirds, and beneath it, a blank legal form titled Promissory Note and Service Contract. The letter was written in Michael's unmistakable drafting hand, each letter formed with the precision of a man who spent his life with a pencil behind his ear. It began, "My darling Ellen, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Do not trust Jeremy and his wife. They will come for what you have. I've watched him borrow and never repay, heard him mock your frugality at family dinners, seen the way she spends money that isn't hers. The life insurance policy is set up with a fortress around it, a trust that only you can unlock, and only in person with your full, informed consent. If they ask for money, make them sign this contract. Every word is there to bind them legally. My attorney reviewed it years ago. The promissory estoppel clause, the specific performance requirement for any service they promise, the liquidated damages multiplier, the arbitration rider, it is all ironclad. Keep this box and the contract as proof. They think you're a pushover because you're quiet. Use that, I love you, P.S. The trust has a dead man's switch neither they nor any power of attorney can circumvent. You are the living key." I read the letter 4 times, my hands trembling not from grief, but from a cold, clarifying focus that settled over my thoughts like a layer of frost. I unfolded the blank contract and studied its clauses with the forensic attention I used to bring to audit season. The promissory note specified a principal sum to be filled in, with a zero-interest rider but a robust services in lieu clause. The borrower, in exchange for full funding of an accredited graduate program, would provide the lender with lifetime professional portfolio management services, defined with granular precision, quarterly performance reviews, annual rebalancing, fiduciary duty with a maximum allowable expense ratio, a prohibition on self-dealing or churning, and a mandatory quarterly in-person meeting. A default clause stated that any breach, including unilateral declaration that the debt was a gift, would trigger immediate acceleration of the full principal plus liquidated damages equal to 300% of the amount, payable within 30 days, along with mandatory binding arbitration in our home county, and a specific performance rider allowing the lender to seek injunctive relief without bond. I had seen hundreds of contracts in my time, and I recognized the architecture of a document designed by someone who had seen every loophole and plugged every single one. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a promise made should be ironclad. The next morning, Jeremy and Tiffany arrived again, this time with a leather portfolio and an air of manufactured sympathy. They sat me at my own dining table with a cup of coffee I had not been asked if I wanted. Jeremy took my hand with a moist palm and said, "Aunt Ellen, we are so worried about you. This big old house, all these memories, it is not healthy for you to be alone. And the insurance money, that is a lot of pressure for someone in your condition." I was 55, not 90, but I let that slide and let my eyes go a little unfocused, the way I had seen my own mother's do in her final years. Tiffany nodded vigorously, her diamond tennis bracelet clinking. "We want you to come live with us in the guest suite. It has its own bathroom, you will have complete privacy, and we will handle absolutely everything. You just rest and heal." Jeremy then slid a power of attorney document across the table, a thick, professionally printed packet with my full legal name, my social security number, my date of birth, and my current address already typed into the fields. My signature line sat at the bottom beneath a dense block of fine print that granted him full durable authority over all my assets, all my accounts, all real property and all decisions, effective immediately and surviving any subsequent incapacity. He capped his pen and said, "And you know, I have been accepted into the MBA program at Whitmore. It is a top program, Aunt Ellen. If you could see your way to investing in my education, I promise you, I will take care of your portfolio for the rest of your life. With a degree from Whitmore, I will be making $250 a year within 2 years, and you will never, ever have to worry about money again. I will personally manage everything, full rebalancing, tax loss harvesting, asset allocation, the whole works." The financial jargon sounded like it had been memorized from a YouTube video the night before. I let my mouth open slightly and said, in the soft, quavering voice of a confused old woman, "Oh, Jeremy, that is so kind. I am so tired right now. My mind is all foggy from the funeral. I cannot even think about signing anything. Maybe tomorrow." Tiffany's jaw tightened for a quarter second, a tiny muscle flicker, but Jeremy smiled. Of course. Take all the time you need. We just want to help." Over the next week I leaned into the act. I allowed them to believe I was disoriented by grief and perhaps the early stages of something worse. I agreed to move into their spare room for my safety, and I let Jeremy think he had convinced me to fund his MBA. The night before he planned to drive me to the bank, I sat down at my writing desk with the original contract template and a clean sheet of my own letterhead, and I typed a verbatim copy on my laptop, preserving every clause, every comma, every semicolon, exactly as Michael's attorney had drafted it. I filled in the principal sum as $92,000, the exact cost of tuition and fees at Whitmore, and I printed 2 crisp originals. I tucked them into my purse alongside the original letter from Michael. The next morning at the trust company office, I met with Elena, the trust officer, a compact woman with short grey hair and the kind of unsmiling competence that made me instantly trust her. I had spoken with her privately the day before and explained without detail that I would be bringing a family member to sign a contract and that I needed an unimpeachable witness. She had agreed. When Jeremy and Tiffany arrived, I said, "Before I transfer the money, dear, there is just a little formality Michael wanted. Just a standard agreement so we both know what we are promising each other." I slid the contract toward him. He barely looked at it, his eyes scanning the first 2 sentences before his phone buzzed with a text from a buddy about fantasy football. Sure, old school Aunt Ellen, I respect it," he said, and he signed with a large, looping, illegible scrawl. Tiffany signed as an additional witness with a dismissive flick of her pen. I then executed the trust distribution request, and Elena verified my identity through a 2-factor process, a biometric fingerprint scan on a small optical reader built into her desk, and a verbal passphrase I had set with Michael years ago, a string of random words he had engraved on the inside of my wedding band. The dead man's switch was satisfied, the trust's internal safeguards recognized me as the living key, and $92,000 was wired directly from the trust account to the Whitmore University bursar's office. Jeremy's MBA was fully funded, and I had a signed, witnessed, ironclad contract that was about to become the most expensive piece of paper he ever ignored. He graduated in 18 months with honors, his transcript a parade of A's, his LinkedIn profile updated with a professionally lit headshot and the tagline Strategic Wealth Architect. He landed a position at Paragon Wealth Strategies, a boutique investment advisory firm downtown, with a starting base salary of $250,000, a signing bonus and a glossy welcome packet. Within 2 weeks of his first day he called me. His voice had changed, shed the faux concern, acquired the smooth, rushed cadence of a man who now considered himself too important for small talk. "Auntie, about that little contract you had me sign, that was just a silly thing you did because you were grieving. The money was a gift. You cannot seriously expect me to manage your tiny retirement account now. I am a busy professional working 80-hour weeks with real clients. Be reasonable." He laughed, a short nasal sound. In the background I heard Tiffany say, "Tell her to get a hobby," and he hung up. I stared at the phone for a full minute, then I placed it carefully on the counter and allowed myself a single, small smile because that was exactly the breach I had been prepared for. But I did not rage. I did not call a lawyer immediately. I maintained the foggy, compliant persona with the discipline of a method actor. When Jeremy called again a few days later, his tone now laced with patronizing reassurance, I said, "Oh, I must have misunderstood, dear. I am sorry if I have been a bother. My memory just is not what it used to be." I let my voice waver and crack. He relaxed audibly, told me not to worry, suggested I just enjoy my golden years and leave the complicated money things to him. Over the following month I became their houseplant. They moved me into the guest suite, a beige room with a single window overlooking the garbage bins, and they mostly ignored me. Tiffany microwaved my meals and left them outside my door with a plastic spoon. They spoke to me in slow, loud sentences, as if I were a toddler or a dog, and they had no idea that I was cataloging every transaction, every receipt, every whispered argument behind closed doors. My old bookkeeper's mind had a near photographic memory for financial data, and I started a mental ledger that I reviewed each night before sleep, adding new entries and cross-referencing them against the growing picture of their desperation. The signs were everywhere. Jeremy spent hours in his home office with the door shut, and I could hear his voice rise and fall in a pattern I recognized from decades of collection calls. Certain words leaked through the cheap drywall: balloon payment, refinance, skipped a month, collections, grace period. He would emerge pale and twitching, snapping at Tiffany about her spending. Tiffany, meanwhile, treated credit cards like unlimited gift certificates. Amazon boxes arrived in stacks of 6 or 7 a day, piling up in the garage. I found a receipt for a $12,000 Italian leather sectional tucked behind a sofa cushion when she asked me to fluff the pillows. Both of their cars were leased luxury SUVs with payments that had to be north of $1,000 each, and I once overheard Jeremy on the phone with a car dealership service department, arguing about a repair bill he could not pay. The discrepancy between his stated $250,000 salary and the visible financial stress was a red flag the size of a barn door, and I intended to find out what was behind it. The opportunity came on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a plumbing disaster. A half-inch copper supply line in the upstairs guest bathroom, the one next to my room, had been slowly corroding for years, and that day it finally let go with a violent burst. Water shot from the wall like a pressure washer, cascading through the ceiling, soaking the hallway carpet, and dripping directly onto the ceiling of Jeremy's home office below. Tiffany shrieked like a fire alarm. Jeremy ran into the hallway, saw the water pouring down his office walls, and froze, his mouth working silently. I, on the other hand, walked calmly down to the basement, located the main water shut-off valve, recognized it as a brass ball valve with a slotted stem, and fetched the long-handled shut-off key hung on a hook nearby. I slotted it onto the stem and turned it 1/4 rotation with a firm, smooth motion. The water stopped. Silence fell. When the plumber arrived 40 minutes later, he surveyed the damage and gave an estimate that made Jeremy's face go grey. The office ceiling was a total loss, the drywall in the hallway needed replacement, and every piece of furniture and electronics in the office had to be moved immediately to prevent mold. Jeremy and Tiffany spent the next hour hauling out monitors, printers, boxes of files, and decorative office plants, but they left the heavy lateral filing cabinet in the corner because it was too cumbersome to lift, and they assumed it was safe where it was. That evening, after they had gone out for a stress relief dinner at a steakhouse I was not invited to, I slipped into the ruined office. The filing cabinet was a standard 2-drawer Hahn model, locked with a simple 5-wafer cam lock. I retrieved a small leather roll of lockpicks from my overnight bag, a kit Michael had given me 20 years earlier after we locked ourselves out of the garden shed, and he taught me, over a rainy weekend, how to tension and rake a basic pin tumbler. I had practiced on every lock in our house until I could open the front door in under 10 seconds blindfolded. A wafer lock like this one was even easier. I inserted a narrow tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied gentle clockwise pressure with my thumb, and then slid a city rake into the top of the keyway. I worked the rake back and forth in a rapid scrubbing motion, feeling the wafers click against the tool. On the third pass I felt all 5 wafers set simultaneously, the plug gave way, and the lock turned with a soft, oily click. I opened the drawer. Inside was chaos. The hanging folders were stuffed with crumpled papers, some torn, some taped back together, some clearly retrieved from a shredder and hastily reassembled. I sat cross-legged on the damp carpet and began assembling a puzzle that told the complete story of their financial collapse. The first document I pulled was a credit card application for a high-limit platinum card from a major issuer, filled out in my full name, my social security number, my date of birth, and my current address listed as Jeremy's house. The annual income field was a fiction, listed as $180,000. The signature line bore a clumsy forgery of my name, the loops too rounded, the slant too upright, none of the angular economy of my actual handwriting. The application was stamped approved, and a recent statement showed a balance of $18,000, all charges for luxury goods, cash advances, and a weekend getaway at a resort I had never visited. The second document was a home equity line of credit application on my colonial house, dated just 3 weeks after I moved in with them. It listed Jeremy as an authorized signatory via the power of attorney he had not yet obtained. A note in the margin in loan officer handwriting read, "Client expects elder relative to grant POA within 90 days, pre-approval requested for bridge financing." They were trying to spend money secured by a house they did not yet legally control, and they were confident enough to document it. The third document was a consolidated debt statement from a third-party collection agency addressed to Jeremy, listing 5 separate defaulted credit accounts, a repossessed jet ski I never knew he owned, a pending lawsuit from a furniture rental company for $7,400, and a total outstanding balance of $64,000. The fourth and most damning was an internal memo from Paragon Wealth Strategies, printed on company letterhead and dated just 2 weeks prior. It was a notice of probation, stating that Jeremy Whitfield had been cited for multiple client misrepresentation incidents and suitability violations, and that his base salary had been reduced to $58,000 pending a compliance review, with termination likely within 30 days. At the bottom, in Jeremy's own handwriting, was a frantic scribble. Need Ellen to sign trust release before I get fired. Tiff spending killing us. Hellock backup maybe. I photographed every page, front and back, with my phone, making sure the time and date stamps were enabled. Then I carefully returned everything to its folder, relocked the cabinet, and walked back to my room as if I had never left. The next morning, I called Alina at the trust company from the bathroom, with the shower running to mask my voice. I told her everything. There was a long pause, and then she said, "Ellen, this is exactly the scenario Michael designed the trust to withstand. The dead man's switch is layered. Any asset transfer, any withdrawal, any change of beneficiary, any attempt to override your authority requires your in-person biometric verification plus the verbal passphrase, and those two factors are legally inseparable. Even a court-appointed guardian or conservator cannot break that lock, because the trust document specifies that your living presence and consent are non-delegible, non-transferable. Your husband hired a very expensive lawyer to make sure of it. I am connecting you now to a federal investigator in the Elder Fraud Task Force who handles cases like this. I will also email you a certified copy of the trust's lock provisions." That call cascaded into a series of meetings over the following week. The investigator, Detective Marchetti, was a calm woman in her 40s with a voice like gravel, and a slow, deliberate way of speaking that told me she had seen every variation of family predation. She reviewed my evidence, the photographs, the forged credit card application, the contract with Jeremy, the recorded phone call where he dismissed it as a gift, and she said, "Mrs. Davies, you have built a textbook case for identity theft, forgery, attempted grand theft, financial exploitation of an elder, and conspiracy. The contract alone supports a civil action for promissory estoppel that is almost unassailable, and the criminal evidence will give you leverage that most victims never get. If you are willing to wear a wire and gather direct admissions, we can seal this thing so tight it will never see daylight." I agreed without a second of hesitation. For the next 3 weeks, I became an undercover asset in my own family's home. The wire was a tiny, flat-button microphone sewn into the collar of a grey cardigan I wore every day, the kind of cardigan that makes you invisible. The receiver was a slim digital recorder hidden in the lining of my purse, and every morning I tested it by saying the date and time into my collar, while Marchetti monitored from her laptop parked down the street. I let my foggy act deepen. I asked the same question 3 times in a row, mislaid my reading glasses in the refrigerator, stared blankly at the television screen when it was off. Tiffany started speaking to me in slow shouts, and Jeremy would pat my hand and say, "Don't you worry about a thing, Aunt Ellen, we've got everything under control." The wire recorded everything. I captured Jeremy on the phone with a real estate agent, scheduling a listing appointment for my house, discussing aggressive pricing and a quick sale, and then telling Tiffany, "Once we get the trust released, we'll have access to the full balance and the house proceeds. That's another $400,000 easy, and we can finally pay off the second mortgage." I captured Tiffany saying, "Just make sure the old bat signs the right papers. I am not living in this dump forever." I captured Jeremy describing how he intended to place my remaining assets into high-commission structured products that would generate kickbacks for him, while eroding my principal. Exactly the kind of self-dealing the contract explicitly prohibited. Every night I transcribed the day's recordings into a notebook I kept hidden under the mattress, and every few days I met Marchetti at a diner 3 towns over to debrief. To seal the case with an emotional hammer that would extinguish any residual guilt I might feel, and that would guarantee a judge's visceral reaction, I staged a maximum cruelty beat. I needed a clean recording that proved beyond any reasonable or unreasonable doubt that they had 0 remaining humanity. On a Tuesday afternoon, I knew Jeremy was expecting a critical call from the real estate agent regarding the listing of my colonial, and I knew he was pacing the living room with his phone clutched in his hand like a grenade. I had practiced the collapse in my room for a week, the way my knees would buckle, the way my hand would fly to my chest, the strangled gasp, the slow, trembling fall. I walked into the living room, my wire cardigan buttoned to my throat, and I waited until I heard his phone buzz with the agent's ringtone. Then I clutched my sternum, let out a raw, choking cry, and crumpled onto the carpet. I lay there with my face pressed into the fibers, my breathing ragged and wet, my hand twitching spastically. I heard Jeremy's footsteps approach and stop. I heard him say without a trace of alarm, "She's probably faking again." My phone's ringing. It's the agent. And then I felt the slight displacement of air as he stepped directly over my outstretched arm, the edge of his loafer brushing my sleeve, and I heard his voice shift to chipper professionalism. "Yes, this is Jeremy Whitfield regarding the property on Oak Lane. We're looking for an aggressive listing price. We need a fast sale. Has the comp report come back yet?" He talked about granite countertops and a new roof and the two-car garage while I lay at his feet, my ear against the carpet, the wire microphone capturing every syllable with horrifying clarity. After 5 full minutes when the call ended, I slowly came to, blinking like a confused child. Tiffany glanced up from her phone and said, "You just got dizzy. Drink some water and lie down." That recording, when Detective Marchetti played it back for me in her car, made me cry for the first time since Michael's death, not from self-pity, but from a cold, final knowledge that the nephew I had once hoped would prove my instincts wrong was irredeemable. The final confrontation was orchestrated with the precision of a closing argument. Jeremy's financial world was collapsing. The collection calls had escalated to threats of wage garnishment and liens. The probation at Paragon was one missed compliance meeting away from termination. His desperation was a physical thing, a tremor in his hands, a yellow tinge around his eyes from sleeplessness. One morning he told me we were going to the trust company's downtown office to simplify my affairs. He had prepared a complete asset transfer package, a revocable living trust with himself as the sole trustee and beneficiary, into which my entire estate, the house, the remaining investments, the insurance residuals, everything, would be irrevocably poured. He needed my live signature and my biometric consent to break the dead man's switch. He believed, with the certainty of a gambler on a hot streak, that I was too far gone to resist. Tiffany dressed me in the grey cardigan with the wire, brushed my hair, and told me it was a big day and I just needed to sign my name like a good girl. We drove downtown, the three of us, in their leased SUV that smelled of air freshener and credit card debt. In the private conference room on the 14th floor, Elena was seated at the head of a long walnut table, a notary seal beside her. A man in a dark suit sat against the wall, a legal pad on his knee. I knew him to be Detective Marchetti's partner, a senior agent with the Financial Crimes Unit. Jeremy slid the thick packet across the polished wood, a pen already uncapped and placed on top. "Just sign here, Auntie, and your future is absolutely secure. We will take care of you forever." I picked up the pen. I looked at it. I twirled it once between my fingers, a gesture I had not made in 6 months. Then I set it down precisely in the center of the unsigned page. I sat up straighter, rolled my shoulders back and let the fog lift from my eyes, replaced by the sharp, unblinking focus of a woman who had spent her entire career catching people like him. I looked directly at Jeremy and said quietly and evenly, "Jeremy, do you remember the little wooden box you threw away the day of Michael's funeral?" His face flickered with genuine confusion. "What box? The one you told Tiffany was probably just old screws. You said Dad's junk and you tossed it in the trash. I pulled it out that night. Michael left me a letter inside warning me about you. It said in his own handwriting, 'Do not trust Jeremy and his wife.' He also left me a contract template, the exact one you signed and then later called a gift. I filed a civil lawsuit for Promissory Estoppel 3 days ago. You were served at your firm's address yesterday morning. Check your work email spam folder, you'll find the summons and complaint. But this is not just about the contract. It is about the credit cards you opened in my name, the HELOC you applied for on my house using a power of attorney you never obtained, the forged signatures, the identity theft, and the recording of you stepping right over my body while I lay there gasping and calling it a fake." I reached into my purse, pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. His recorded voice filled the room. "She's probably faking again. My phone's ringing, it's the agent." Then his chipper voice discussing granite countertops. Jeremy's face went the color of spoiled milk. Tiffany started to say something shrill, but the sound died in her throat. At that moment, the man in the dark suit stood, opened his jacket to reveal a badge, and 2 additional officers who had been waiting in an adjacent office entered through a side door. Jeremy was placed under arrest for identity theft, elder abuse, forgery, conspiracy to commit grand theft, and attempted financial exploitation of an elder. Tiffany was handcuffed on accessory charges and the separate credit card fraud counts. The forged POA, the credit applications, and the entire asset transfer package were seized as evidence. My colonial house was never listed. My trust remained locked and untouched, and I walked out of that building into the afternoon sun with my cardigan still whispering its secret history into the recorder in my purse. The legal proceedings that followed were methodical, satisfying, and uncharacteristically swift. The criminal case moved first, And with the mountain of recorded evidence, the photographs, and the testimony from Alina about the dead man's switch, Jeremy's attorney advised him to accept a plea deal. He served 6 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of formal probation with strict financial supervision, a permanent bar from any fiduciary or financial advisory role, and a restitution order that was largely symbolic because the stolen credit card debt was charged back by the issuers once the fraud was confirmed. But the civil judgment was the real engine. My promissory Estoppel claim, argued by a sharp young litigator who specialized in contract enforcement, was textbook. The elements were clear. A clear and definite promise in writing, witnessed and notarized, reasonable and foreseeable reliance by me on that promise to my detriment, the disbursement of $92,000, actual reliance, and a manifest injustice if the promise were not enforced. The defendant's own recorded voice calling it a gift, and his signature on the contract formed an admission against interest that the judge cited in her summary judgment order. The liquidated damages clause, the treble multiplier, was upheld as reasonable given the egregious nature of the breach and the fraudulent inducement. The final judgment totaled $340,000, inclusive of principal, damages, prejudgment interest, and full attorney's fees. The garnishment order, which I now hold as a laminated document in my office, attaches 25% of Jeremy's gross wages from any future employment, in perpetuity until the judgment is satisfied. His firm terminated him within hours of his arrest, and his FINRA registration was permanently revoked, so his earning capacity is a fraction of what he once projected. But the garnishment follows him wherever he goes, hourly or salaried, and every 2 weeks a check arrives in the restitution trust I control. I used the first year of those garnished payments, along with a portion of my own untouched savings and a small grant from an elder justice nonprofit, to lease a narrow storefront on a quiet street 2 miles from my old neighborhood. I named it Portfolio of Promises. It is a free financial literacy clinic, open 4 days a week where anyone can walk in, sit down with a certified financial planner, a rotating roster of volunteer CPAs, and a freshly brewed cup of coffee, and learn how to read a credit card statement, build a budget, spot a predatory loan, understand compound interest, structure a simple investment portfolio, or recognize the early warning signs of financial exploitation. The walls are lined with framed infographics about fiduciary duty and the power of a written contract. The conference table is the same one from my old dining room, because I believe in repurposing what the vultures tried to take. And on a sideboard next to the coffee machine, there is a shelf of bright ceramic mugs. Each one thrown and glazed by a local potter bears the phrase, "My MBA was funded by my aunt's sacrifice," in a cheerful looping script. Clients love them. They sip their coffee, they ask questions they were too embarrassed to ask anywhere else, and slowly the shame of being scammed hardens into the clear-eyed power of being informed. It is the most profoundly satisfying work I have ever done, and I suspect Michael would have been proud. Part of Jeremy's court-ordered community service, a condition of his probation, requires him to volunteer at Portfolio of Promises 4 times a year. He arrives in the morning, signs in under my supervision, and puts on the tie I had custom-made for him. It is a handsome silk tie in a professional navy blue, but running vertically down the front blade, visible only when you stand close, is a line of embroidery in a dark crimson thread I chose myself. It reads Fiduciary Fraudster. He wears it for the entire 8-hour shift. He files old tax returns, refills the coffee machine, shreds outdated documents, and avoids eye contact with the clients who smile and thank him for his volunteer work. I watch from my desk in the corner, a matching mug warming my hands, and I remember the sound of that wooden box hitting the bottom of a trash bag, and the smooth click of a lock opening to reveal the precise, patient love of a man who built a dead man's switch into our future because he trusted my competence more than he trusted anyone's kindness. Every lock has a key. Every scheme has a countermeasure. And every promise, if it is drafted correctly, will outlast the person who tries to break it. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me your story in the comments below. If you believe that a promise should be more than just words, hit like and subscribe to follow more tales where meticulous planning beats smooth talk every single time. I will be back next week with another story of hidden evidence and patient reckonings. Until then, keep your contracts clear, your locks well maintained, and your ties embarrassing.